At 6:21, well, he's one of Britain's most colourful politicians, and he's vowing to make it easier for Kiwis to head to the UK on their big OE. Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is in the country for talks on trade, foreign policy and international security, and of course to discuss what the Kiwi-British relationship will look like post-Brexit. International relations expert Robert Patman joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Hilary.
I wanted to start talking about what each side is hoping to achieve during this visit. Let's start with Boris Johnson. What does the UK want out of this?
Well, I think Mr Johnson wants to discuss, first of all, this is part of the preparation of Britain going global. This is the rhetoric and the spin that's being put on Britain leaving the European Union. Of course, critics would say that if you can't show leadership in your backyard, what chance have you got of going global? But let's put that to one side. Coming to New Zealand, an old and trusted friend, it seems a good place to start. It's part of an initiative, of course, by Mr Johnson to link. He's also going on to Australia after he visits New Zealand, and there's also going to be diplomatic contacts with Japan. So this is part of Britain's opening up. He wants to discuss trade. He's indicated he wants a free trade agreement with New Zealand. He said something about New Zealand being at the front of the queue, and there was also discussions about foreign policy and international security. What does New Zealand want from it? Well, we're very happy to sign a free trade agreement with Britain. It's a big country, 64 million people, but of course, as Mr English, the Prime Minister, has indicated, the agreement with the EU comes first because this is a market of 500 million plus people. So I think this is something that Mr Johnson will be aware of course.
Yes, he'll be aware of it. How might he feel about that, that actually we'd rather sign with the EU before we sign with him?
I think it's a sensation the British are going to encounter again and again. The fact of the matter is they have more clout inside the EU than they have outside it. And, you know, what we're seeing in the build-up to the departure of Britain, or the apparent departure, I mean, Brexit still looks uncertain as far as I'm concerned. Britain is discovering that the reality and the rhetoric and the reality may be different. The United States, even under the Trump administration, has promised Britain a free trade agreement, but has also indicated that its priority in strategic terms is a free trade agreement with the EU. So this is going to be a reoccurring pattern for the British government. I
just want to pick up on something you said there. You said you were questioning that Brexit will even happen. Is that even possible this far into the process? Well,
it looks far into the process, but you see a lot of promises were made, Hilary, that this would make Britain more sovereign. It would make the country more prosperous. You know, you had Johnson himself saying we can have our cake and eat it. But the point is that what he meant by that is that Britain could stay in the single market but leave the EU. That's no longer possible, it would seem. And we also know the British economy is now the worst performing economy in the G7 group, and the worst performing economy in the 27-strong, 28-strong grouping of the EU. And what Brits are seeing is that inflation is close to 3%, that a number of companies are relocating, international companies and British companies are relocating to the EU. And so what we have is an economy that's basically fast declining. And they're going to be one of the reasons that Mrs May went for an early election, which backfired on her, was because she anticipated there were economic storm clouds on the horizon, and she needed to get that, what she thought would be a mandate for Brexit early on, before the economic consequences began to manifest themselves. So the British find themselves in a difficult position. They're engaged in Brexit negotiations, but the aspirations of Brexit are becoming undermined by the economy.
Fascinating stuff. Professor Robert Patman, thank you for your time this morning.